A gut check for my brokers and owners out there this week. If you keep on saying agents don't show up, they don't use our tools, they just don't want it bad enough, I won't argue with you that there are some practitioners who have a gap when they should fill. However, I'm saying today that you have a bigger one hiding just underneath that fact, because if the agents inside your office annoy you, if they waste your time, if they create more problems than they solve, that's just not who they are. That's what you trained, and it's what you tolerated. And that gap right after usually onboarding ends and the real training begins, that's where your best 2-year plus agents quietly decide to leave. So let's talk about standards. Let's talk about the standard you're actually building and the standard you think you're building. Let's get into it. Welcome to Renovating Real Estate. I am Sandy McMaster, and each week here we renovate the way real estate operators think, decide, and execute. And we do that using the Identity Ops method. Recently, trademark submitted. Just so happy to share that with you guys. That's a big deal. And why am I bothering? Because most agents and brokers do not operationalize what truly makes them different. And we're on a mission to change that. Today, we're talking about the gap nobody wants to name. It's the gap after onboarding. The gap that turns into, honestly, broker resentment. And the gap that quietly bleeds out your best middle tier agents. If you're a broker owner and you keep saying things like agents don't want to work, they don't use our tools, they don't show up for anything, I'm going to say something that might sting a little bit. That's not an agent problem. That's an identity problem. Because what you're actually describing is a services gap you created. You onboard. You hand them a mentor, you hand them a login, a website, a few meetings, a few you shoulds, and then you disappear. Not because you're evil. Good Lord, you're the furthest thing from evil, because you're out of capacity. But then you get on a podcast and complain about what happens in the vacuum. And I just want to ask, what did you expect? Because the market always fills a vacuum. And when you don't build a real developmental path after year one, agents don't become better. They become self-protective. They become skeptical. They become nomadic. And that's the agent shuffle that all of the broker owners experience. I think it's up towards of 16% of agents that shuffle just between brokerages after and beyond year 1 and 2. So let's lay down some framework here. Let's lay it down. Most brokerages do not have a training problem. They have an identity problem. And when you have an identity problem, you always end up with a services problem, because identity answers the question, what do we believe a good agent is here? Not production, not volume, not awards, not a slogan. Operating standards, decision standards, client services standards, communication standards, boundary standards. How do we do business standards? If you can't define good, you can't train it. You can't coach it. You cannot reinforce it. You can't hold people accountable to it. So what do you do instead? You recruit. You keep the machine being fed. You keep the dues flowing. You keep the new licensees coming in because it's simple. It's trackable. It's measurable. It's a line item. And you can tell yourself the hard part is agent motivation, but it isn't. The hard part is building a real after onboarding development system. One that does not rely on your 9 p.m. heroics. And this is where I want to slow down a little bit and be very careful. A brokerage can't keep calling agents independent business owners and then train them as if they're employees. You can't do both. If they're independent business owners, then you owe them something that's much different than done for you. You owe them standards. You owe them a path. You owe them a clear definition of this is what good looks like here. And if you're not willing to do that, okay, all right, fine. But then you don't get to resent them for building it their own way, because they will. Now let's talk about 3 complaints. The 3 complaints I hear most. First, they just don't want to work. Agents they just don't want to work. Now, sometimes I'll grant you that's true. Not everybody should be in this industry. But most of the time, what it actually means is what you're telling me to do goes against my core values. And broker owners hate that sentence because it sounds like attitude, but it's often clarity. And agents will work very hard for a standard they respect. They will grind for a path that makes them better operators. They will show up for something that actually has weight to it. But if your plan is vague meetings and motivational posters, they feel that emptiness. Second, here's the second most often heard complaint. They don't use our tools. Here's the translation of that. Your tools can't accommodate or don't accommodate how I work. Tools are not strategy. Tools are not development. Tools are not leadership. If the tool doesn't help me win, it actually hurts my progress. And if the tool is adding friction, I will actively avoid it. That's not rebellion. That's a business owner doing triage. Number 3, this is the third most often heard complaint for me. They don't show up for anything. Here's the translation. What you're delivering doesn't help me become a better business operator. And here's the real issue hiding underneath all 3. You never defined what better means. So you cannot build a program that makes them better. So out of necessity, you default to generic. And generic does not create loyalty. Generic creates drift. Now, this is where I can use an analogy that I think broker owners can really grab onto. It's like when agents are advising a seller and the seller asks, okay, so what's the plan after my home hits the MLS? If the agent stammers or hedges, that's not a professional answer. They'll be labeled as a button pusher. Because the real work for an agent begins after the MLS. The real work is strategy, it's adjustment, it's attention, it's a million things. The real work is staying engaged when the excitement wears off. Now, the same could be said for agents. Onboarding is the MLS entry equivalent, or that MLS moment. That's onboarding for the agent journey. What happens after that is the actual craft. It requires intention. It requires standards. It requires a system that doesn't collapse when you get busy. And most brokerages don't have it. So what happens? New agents flail, mid agents get ignored, and the top agents self-manage. And the middle producer, the one you should be obsessed with protecting, they start asking a brutal question. What am I actually getting here? Because they're the profit center. They're producing enough to matter. They're stable enough to scale. They're not needy like brand new agents. They're not untouchable like the mega team. They're the middle. They're the margin. They're the engine. And you ignore them. That's why they leave. And P.S., there is a very much alive and well, a quiet quitting version of what I am talking about. They're the middle producers that you just never see. They just don't have another option. Then I hear broker owners say, well, retention is hard right now. No, retention is expensive. Recruiting is simple. That's the truth. And the simplest way to keep a P&L looking alive is to keep feeding the machine. But here's the thing. That strategy breaks in a consolidation era, because consolidation is going to reduce personalization. Consolidation is going to reduce local leadership capacity, and consolidation centralizes decisions. Consolidation standardizes everything into the lowest common denominator. And the more big box the brokerage becomes, the more the real differentiator becomes the office level leadership and operation. The broker who still has a calendar, the broker who still has a point of view, the broker who still has standards, the broker who still, God bless you all, has time. And that's going to get really uncomfortable, because broker owners are being asked to do two jobs that just don't calibrate. Job one is the retention through development and standards. And job two is recruiting volume to meet mandates. Those do not fit neatly on a calendar, and they don't show up the same way on a P&L either. So if you're a broker owner listening, here is the gut check. If you're tired of agents treating this like a side hustle, what's your 90-day plan for them? Not your hope, not the we encourage you to version, not your we love for you to. What is your plan? What standard are you training and enforcing? And if you don't have one, respectfully, stop complaining about what you tolerate. Because you can't be afraid of losing the profit margin of mediocrity and then complain about mediocrity at the same time. You can't keep the loose standard just because it pays today and then act shocked when it costs you tomorrow. So I'll land the plane with one clean, short idea. Mind the gap. The gap is not more training classes. The gap is not more tools. The gap is not another mentor program. The gap is your identity. Because identity becomes standards. Standards become services. Services become loyalty. And when you don't have them, that is when you get the churn. You get the frustration. You get the drift. You get resentment. And then you blame the agent. So here's my final line. Before you complain, show me your training. Show me what happens after onboarding ends. Show me what you enforce. Show me your standards, not production standards, operating ones. Let me taste the food you are cooking. Because if you can't explain what you're building in your agents, then you're not building agents. You're just collecting them. And if you want the thing that fills this gap, I'm not bashful to say it because I was that agent. And it's where all the work that I do in identity ops stems from and comes from. I just didn't know it was going to become so relevant in the era of consolidation. Identity ops is literally the mashup of individualized attention that agents are craving and the standards brokerages are unwilling to enforce or can't. It's business development after onboarding, and it leaves the decisions with the agents who are supposed to be being raised as business owners, not employees. It is operational clarity. It's a definition of what good that doesn't change based on whoever's loudest. And it's how you stop losing the middle agent. You cannot afford to lose. And in this next era, the broker who wins, I don't think they're going to be the one with the biggest brand. I think they're going to be the one with the clearest standards and the courage to enforce them. You can subscribe to Substack for the full essay and the tools behind it. And if this episode hits you in the heart, here's the simplest way to support. Think of it like an operating standard. You don't just agree with a standard, you support it. So please feel free, a rating, a review, a comment, welcome them all. It's how we are all going to keep renovating together. And of course, if this really resonated with you, please send it to a colleague, a friend, or a broker who may need to hear it. Thanks. It takes 10 seconds, really makes a difference. Thank you so much. And if you want the operating system, that's what identity ops is for. Until next week.